Hashem the choice of your time, and that's going to be the rest of your life. What are you going to do? If you want to get up at 6 in the morning, then 6 to 7, down at 7, and go out for your day, that's excellent. That's a career, right? Everyone who's kaveitim, it's an extremely important thing. So, this is it might be a little bit of a controversial story. I don't know so much, but if you guys throw books to me, it's all good. So there was a yid whose name was Rav Shimshon Pincus, right? You ever heard that name before? Rav Shimshon Pincus? So he was a very big, tremendous, he was a big chacham and a big tzaddik. He just loved Jews so much. He taught in the Shevet seminars for many years. And he told over a story that happened to him. And it was very, very powerful. So he said he lived in Ofakim. He was actually the Rav in Ofakim. And unfortunately, there was a car accident in 92, and he passed away with his wife and family, kids. It was very, very tragic. But the stories were obviously before this. So he was leaving Bnei Brak, I guess in the early 90s, and there was people hitchhiking. I always said at Bnei Brak. So he was going back to Ofakim. So his kid puts out his hand. Maybe must have been 15 years old, 14, 15, 16 years old. And he picks him up, and the kid gets in the car, and so they start schmoozing. He says he's going to Beersheba. So he's going to Ofakim, Beersheba, so you're like on the holiday. So while they're on the ride, Rav Shimshon's telling us over on a shir. He says, "Look," he says, "I was feeling a little bit chutzpahdik, and I looked over this kid, and he had a knitted kippah on, like a kippah, and he looks over the kid. He says, I don't know where this came from. I don't know why I was being the chutzpah." He said, "But I knew who the kid was because when he told me his last name, it happened to be in Beersheba. There's a very prominent doctor who specializes in the field where people come all over the world to come see him in Beersheba, and he's an Anglo, originally American." And it's Dr. Braun, maybe something. If you need to know the exact name, I'll be happy to tell you. But he knew the father, knew the family, and the children such fun. He's a big time in He learns also half his day and works out his day. Very prominent doctor. So his children also beautiful Bnei Torah, and this young man was learning in yeshiva, and he was going home to see his family. So Rapikas looked over and said to him, "Look," he says, "if Mashiach was going to come tomorrow," he said, "and don't," he said, "I don't know why I was being so, what's the word? I don't want to say chutzpah, being a little bit, what's the word? Pushy. Not pushy, but being like a little bit silly. So he said, he looked over, he says to him, if Mashiach was going to come tomorrow, to this, it's going to come back to life, if Mashiach was going to come tomorrow, right now, what color kippah would he be wearing? What do you ask? Would it be knitted kippah? Would it be black kippah? Would it be orange kippah? Would it be non-naf kippah? Would it be white? What would it be, right? So he asked this kid, and the kid's like, I don't know. Like I'm just learning. Like I don't know. And Rapikas wasn't even saying anything. But he was saying it could be any color. Who knows what it's going to be? I know it's going to be that he's going to love every yid, and it's going to be. I think it's going to be maybe a turban. Who knows? So that was like like a white thing flying from. So the kid had nothing to say. So that was the end of the story. 2 days later, Rapikas gets a phone call from who? From the doctor. Doctor calls him. He says, "I thank you so much for taking my son, making sure he got safely to Beersheba. How's the Rav doing? Baruch Hashem, for the Rav." He said, "I have one small question for the Rav." Sure, okay. He said, if the Rambam was to come alive today, would any yeshiva in the world take him as a Ram in the yeshiva? Like, would it take him as like a Rebbe in yeshiva? Never. Because the Rambam knew science, he knew mathematics, he knew everything. He learned anything that had to do with secular knowledge. The Rambam was a master. He was a doctor, he was everything. So Pinka said, I had a patch coming, and I got a patch, because he's 100% on the mark. That's a good question. So how did the Rambam answer? So Rav Pinka said over to the father a tremendous idea. He said, this is the mashal that the Rambam gives himself. Okay, the Rambam says that there's a state, a massive, huge estate with thousands of workers and a huge, very wealthy man who has just grounds and land, just tons and tons of people working for him. So every single person has their own job, right? Yeah, this person's gardening, this person's the cooking, this person's the cleaning, this person's the washing the clothes, this just the dishes. He had so many people working for him. They all had their own, the stable people and the gardeners. Everyone had their own position. So who was the pinnacle in the middle of his house? Like if you looked, that was like Kodesh Kadoshim, like the Holy of the Holies. Who was that? His wife. She was the most precious, the most holy, the most sanctified thing in the entire house, and that was what he'd always bring. So let's say this guy one day he's out in the fields, he's out in the house, and he's shopping around and looking around, and he's in the fields, and he sees, let's say, one of the ladies, let's say, is working in the house. Let's say he looks at her in a way that's maybe not appropriate, or she's maybe that kind of maybe looks the wrong way. So what did it say right there on the phone? The Rambam say. He said, what should he do? He should take her and he should say, fire her. Like you have to she has to go out of the house, because as soon as there's someone there that is going to challenge the wife, who's the most important thing, it's like out, right? So what did Rambam say? He said, the Torah, which is the idea where we put in the pinnacle of the whole reality of life, that's the center of the house. These other things we learn, you have to have a parnasa. But the Chazon said, we had a store, right? And one time someone came in and said, the Chaznish, do you learn? Are you learning Torah? And he said, whenever I have spare time, I learn. Right? That was his answer. It was a great two. He was learning 18 hours a day. But what's the idea? That's what became the Chazanish, was a genius, genius. Because the pinnacle of the house is the Torah, and that's how we can start our day. That's what we created for. And man's obligation is to learn. Whatever that kaviyas is, whether it's the morning, or it's afternoon, or if it's both, or it's evening, if it's a half an hour, if it's 20 minutes, that's like the head of the house. If we have something else in our life that becomes even more important, or it becomes like the goal, you got to say, wait a minute. You got to just put in perspective what's most important, and that's what can help lead us in our lives. Heard a story about the Chavetz Chaim also, a beautiful story. It said that one time a Yid opened up his store in Radin. There was like the ghetto area, and this Jew opened up a store on Shabbos. He was a wine merchant, and so people were just, you can't do that on Shabbos. You can't open your store on Shabbos. So he said the Chavetz Chaim, you're the Rav, you got to speak to him. So he goes in the store, and this Jewish guy, the store, he says, "Ooh, Rav, what do I owe the honor?" He said, "I want to give you a business deal. I come to give you a business deal. If you listen to me, I promise you're going to make double. Want to listen? Want to hear it? Absolutely, man. Sure." So he says, "Take me back and show me your wines." Takes him to the back of the store, and he shows him all the different barrels. Right? They had all these big barrels, and each barrel had a different wine. It had a red wine, a white, Zinfandel, and you had a Chardonnay. You had all the different. So he said, barrel holds. All my barrels are 20-liter barrels. Only holds 20 liters of wine. So listen what I'm going to tell you. Ready? And if you do it, you're going to make double. Ready? He says, yes. He said, bring me another tap. Each barrel has on the bottom a tap, right? The barrels to take out the wine. So bring me another tap. He brings it. He says, now drill this tap next to the one that's already there. So you'll have two taps. And then you'll get 40. You get an extra 20. For another tap, you'll get another 20. Right? So you get 40. So the guy's like, come on, I'm not stupid. It's impossible. So what did the Chavetz Chaim say to him? He said, on Rosh Hashanah, Hashem decides how much a person is going to make for the whole year, right? So it's decided. We have to put forth the shtadlut. If you sit there now in bed and you don't get up the entire day, so that's what you're going to get. But if you try to make an effort, and that effort comes forth, so it's going to come. So Hashem already decides what you're going to make the whole entire year. Being open on Shabbos, you're not winning anything. You know what I'm saying? So I know people. One guy, whatever. There's certain times like on Erev Shabbos that you should stop working. So there's the one sheet is from Mincha Katana, and from Mincha Gedolah, excuse me, which is like, let's say 11:33 is Mincha is like 11:54 today, or Mincha Katana, which is 2.5 hours before the Shkia. So that's the machlokes in the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah says Paskin, it's only 2.5 hours of Mincha Katana. You can still work 100% and make profit. Any work after that, it doesn't say there necessarily will be bracha in your hand. So I spoke to a guy, and he said to me, I always go as late as I can before Shabbos, and those jobs I always have to go. Like I never see bracha from those jobs. But if it's a chesed or if it's a hefsed, good. I fix fridges. If someone's fridge is going off and the food's going off, it's a mitzvah. Even if it's a cholamoid, even if it's certain times that it's a hefsed moment. So for me to go to the mitzvah, and it's not going to be not sending bracha on that work. But you got to know what the gedarim are, etc. And try to stay in that framework. I saw a Gemara today, which is a really beautiful Gemara. There's actually two Gemaras. One is in Brachas on Yud Daled Amid Aleph, and it says a beautiful thing. It says Amar Rav Idi Bar Avin Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Ashim. It says Aser Loy LaAdam LaAsois Chafatzav Kodim Shis Tala. It's forbidden for a person to do his work or his own needs before he goes to daven. Shneimar says Tzedek Lifonav Haylech, right? Righteousness before you go. What's Tzedek? Rashi tells us. Right, the Yasim Ladera the Pama, and that's where his feet will go on the dera. So it says it's very important for a person not to do his own needs before you do Hashem's needs. Why? Because the Gemara goes on and says, Amarav Idi Bar Oven, Amarav Yitzhak Bar Oshin. It says, Kol Hamispala, anyone who davens first, and also Rashi says over here words, but Acharkach, and afterwards Yotze Ladera, he goes out to do his work. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will say Loy Chatat. Hashem was going to do those work for him. You know what I'm saying? If you just put Hashem first and you make sure I'll take care of you, Hashem's like, no, it's like the red carpet goes out for the rest of the day. And you'll see the Siyata D'Shmaya, and you'll realize that, Eretz Yisrael, there's a bit of a difference regarding working in Eretz Yisrael and working in America. There's a little bit of a difference. I think that if a person's Kovei eating, even if it's in America, it's the same. But there's a certain thing called Teva, and there's a certain thing called see out like hashkafa. So Eretz Yisrael very much is the land of Eretz Yisrael, and the holiness of Eretz Yisrael works, on an aspect of hashkafa, that a person can, if you get $10 an hour and you work 10 hours, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have $100. You know what I'm saying? And Eretz Yisrael doesn't mean that. You can work 10 hours, you're not going to walk around $100 because it's hashkafa. In America, it's more like teva. You have $10 an hour, you work 10 hours, you can walk around $100. That's just how it works. I think if a person learns and makes that the ikar of his day, even if it's 10 minutes after davening, you're going to do your 3 mishnayos, and 3 mishnayos means in less than 2 years you can do all of Shas mishnayos. You know what I'm saying? A little in Yiddishkeit is a lot. A lot is nothing, because a lot means the Yetzirah wants you to do a lot, because he knows it's very hard to keep up with that, and you're just going to fall. But a little bit is a lot, because that consistency over time, even 2 mishnayos a day takes 3.5 years. 3 mishnayos a day, but that's a lot. Even 2, just do 2. Whatever a person's going to do, you find that in your own life. But a little bit, even like 1 aliyah a day, you end up finishing Shtei Mikvah. And then, it's just a building. And Daf Yomi also is a tremendous thing. One woman gave me Musa. She said her husband does Daf Yomi. And he said that Daf Yomi is an extreme burden. It's a tremendous amount of burden. And I was fixing this lady's washer, right? So she said, he says if he misses 1 day, it's like 2 days. And he misses 2 days, it's like 4 days. He's got to catch up with the Daf. And it's like constant pressure. She's like, this laundry is my Daf Yomi, and I need this machine to work. It's if I miss 1 day, it's 2 days. If 2 days, it's 4 days. Everyone's got their job, and they're supposed, and everyone can help around. But that concept that we stay on top of whatever it is you're staying on top of, it's very important. Let's see I heard a beautiful story about the cheshivas, the cheshivut of Torah, which is very important. I've been going to the Kotel once a month with a group of Rabbanim from Beit Shemesh for the last almost 8 years. And so one of the people in the car is a Dayan. He's like a young man, but he's a very, very intelligent person. He's open to Beit Dins, and he sits in the Beit Din. He's very special. So whenever we're in the car, he's usually sitting in the front and next to another Rabban, squashed in over. So I always ask him, what's the latest in Beit Din? I get his really cool Beit Din cases. And, unfortunately, it's not so cool, but very often you can find something mundane that's not issues, and everything he does is with money. It's all money issues. So he said that there was a yeshiva buffer who was in yeshiva in Jerusalem, and he was studying, and he was a very big masmid, they call it, right? He was very focused, and when learning was learning, and just sit and learn, and that was the time to do it. So he was very focused on his learning, and he got a letter from the army office that he had to come for his tzaviyus. So he said, he made a mental note, I got to go, and I got to show up and deal with it and fill everything. I got to do everything. So because of his learning was so involved with something, he forgot totally about it, and it passed over. So then he got another letter saying you missed your first appointment and you have to come. And this date, he said, exactly, completely forgot about it. So in total sincerity from his studying and learning and day and night, while he was young and while you guys are young, you can hopefully do this. Just plug away. This is the time of life to do it. You have all the strength. You guys are in these 100-year-old bodies right now. So much power you can put forth. So, this guy, his kid was also staggering away learning, and he missed the second one, completely missed it. So he got another letter saying, if you don't come to this stop use, we're going to send the police out to you, and you have to come. And he said, how am I going to remember? So he made a mental note of it, and in the end, he remembered. But it said on the stop use, said, bring your Zud, and bring your paperwork, and bring a certain issue. So he gets to the army office, and he says, I'm here, and he shows up, and they say, okay, where's your Zud? And he said, I forgot it. I just left. I just ran out of the shul. I ran out of the basement. I forgot to bring it. They're like, this is enough joking around. Listen, you have 1 hour, like right now, 1 hour to get it and to come back here. And so he's like, okay. And he didn't, just kind of walked out bewildered from the office. So this guy looks at him and sees he looks like a young man. Looks like very put together. So he said, what happened? You okay? He said, well, explain what happened. He said, come in my car. I'll take you right now. I'll take you back to yeshiva to get you to the So like I don't know. So he took him back to yeshiva. Like amazing. So got back in the car. So he said, how much can I pay you for this? I really, really appreciate you taking me, and the taxi would take longer, and you charge me so much more. So how much can I pay you? And he said, I see that you're very diligent. I see that you learn, beautifully. He said, I want 1 minute of your learning, just 1 daka, literally 1 minute. So the kid's like, he's driving in the car. Was he going to say no? So he said, okay, fine. We kind of agree. So he gets to the army office. And he showed up, and he got there just in time, and he filled out, did everything he was supposed to do, and then he was going back to yeshiva. The guy waited for him. So when he got back in the car, he said to him, pulls out 200 shekel from his pocket, and he said, I'm going to pay you for the ride, 200 shekel. And he said, the situation was a little bit uncomfortable, and I really didn't want to give up my 1 minute, so I'm not allowed to on that 1 minute. it's a very big thing, women, and I'm not Nevada. And the guy said, no, I took you, and I want the 1 minute. That's the deal. And he said, I'm so sorry, with all due respect, please take the money. And he's like, I'm not taking the money. So ended up, the guy took him to basement, took the kid to basement on me. And he said to him, I want my 1 minute. I drove you for an hour, and I want 1 minute learning. So the base didn't pass him. What was their psak? Beautiful. They said there's a Gemara in Yevamos that says if a person is running from jail and he gets to the riverbank, and they want to cross the river, so instead, if a person says, okay, it's 4 times the price to get across, instead of 30 shekel, it's going to be 120 shekel. So the guy says, okay, I'll do it. And when you get to the other side, you only have to pay him the 30 shekel that it really was worth. That's the halacha. And brought down the Gemara. So he said, here, the young man, you were kind of forced into a little bit. And ultimately, he said, you don't get the video, you wouldn't take the 200 shekel. And later on, there was another Stocha story that happened from it. You saw that everyone won from it. But bottom line was, for this young man, and the idea that even 1 minute of prayer is really extremely important. And every word we learn is I'm sure you guys learn this all day long, but it's real life. I'm sure it's real life. There's nothing greater. Okay, so what was the other one we learned today? So another idea about this week's parsha. It's supposed to be called Yaakov Avinu, and Parsha told us Yaakov Avinu is the pinnacle of Torah. That's what he is. His Midot are Torah and Emet. That's what Yaakov Avinu is, and that's what he was. He was the culmination of Avram and Yitzchak together, and Yaakov. And so when Yaakov Avinu left Beersheba on his way to Choron, right, he made like a beeline north, and as he was going from south up to north, he skipped right over the Har Habayis, totally. And when he realized that he skipped over Har Habayis, he got a bit jolted, right? It turns around and said, I didn't even get a chance to be Migdal in the Makom of Migdal where my forefathers were Avram and Yaakov and Avram Yitzchak were Migdal. So when he turned around, the Gemara says, Rashi says that Har Habayis came to him. He had 2 pieces of derech. He looked at one step, and he was already on Har Habayis. So what's the idea like that? It doesn't make any sense. Who is Yaakov Avinu? Yaakov Avinu learned Torah from Yitzchak, right? Then where did Yaakov go for 14 years before he even took off to start his life, right? It said he didn't see sleep, his eyes didn't see sleep, he didn't even go to a bed. And he sat in the Yeshiva Shem and Ava for 14 years and just built himself before he went out into the world. Because it's a tough world out there. But it's a lot of challenges, and there's less challenges in the confines of the walls of the Spanish. And outside, when we have to apply what we learn from the basement, in the basement, if we have to apply it, it gets a little more challenging. So what happened with Yaakov Avinu? How could he miss it? How could he, he was going north, he went right over and he missed it? How could it be? So I heard one Rav give his opinion, and the interesting idea that even when a person can sit and learn to an extent, when we leave, eventually our security of base measures, we go out in the real world, a person automatically kind of, you know what I'm saying, it's like a little bit of a minute, like a step, like a madrega. We try to grow in our madregas of midot and take on, slowly small things that we feel we're ready for. So the second you leave, they can go down a little bit, even so much so that Yaakov Avinu, after leaving Shem Never, and was like out of Shem Never, the yeshiva, passed right over Har Habayis, and then popped it and went right back. So we should also pop it and, run right back to the walls of the base measure. You guys have any questions? Thoughts? Questions? Ideas? No? Okay, so I saw another Gemara, and this is the Gemara we're learning right now. I have a Chavrusa. We learn every day from 9 to 12. And in the learning seder of 9 to 12, there's a Rav who comes a couple times a week, and he gives over ideas in the Gemara. In Yeshiva Chaim Berlin in America, Rav Hutner, his shita of learning was to take a Gemara, and to take the Gemara down through Halacha, Lamaisa, through Halacha, all the way to Halacha, Lamaisa, through the Shulchan Aruch, and take the Rif, the Ran, all the major opinions, the Rambam, all the way down to the Mishnah Berurah. So there's one of the greatest Masechtas to do that with is Shabbos is a big one, but Brachas is a great one. Because Brachas will take you, all through oceans of Halacha. So that's what we're doing right now. We're in the midst of Brachas. We're on Daf Ches, and today in the Daf we learn something that was just today. We learned that I'll find it, but I can't see, so give me a second. There it goes. So it says Amar le Rav Yochanan. Okay, Amar le Rav Yochanan. It says Rav Yochanan. Heche sabe b'Bava. Right? There were these certain sabis, like sabbas, the old people that were in Bava. Right? So that's the question. They say, what do you mean there are old people in Bava? It doesn't make any sense. It says Tema. How could that be? Amar leman yirbu yemechem u yemei b'nechem al ha'adama. It says your days of your days and your children's will be lengthened on the land. So how can there be old people in Belleville? It's not Eretz Yisrael. It's not the land of Eretz. So how could that be? That's a kasha. So it says Allah Democracy. It says about the Chutzlaritz. Look, it doesn't say necessarily in Chutzlaritz. So it says Kevin the Amrle. And today the more like this. It says the Amr. It says Kevin the Amrle me Kimi or Mechashke. These guys over in Belleville got to shul early. Mekimi or Mechashke, and also in the evening the Beit Kinisha to go to the shul. Right before davening for a few minutes, they got there earlier. And also, by Marv, they stayed for a little longer to Beit Kinisha, and for that reason, they were zecher. All of them had the suit of getting riches yomim, long life, and long years. So it doesn't necessarily mean it does say our days will be lengthened all out of the land, and that's true. But when a person makes the the foundation of the day and the whole like the center of the house, you can make that idea that even if, like you said, even if it's a half an hour day, whatever that it's kovei, like kovei itim b'torah, it says that's one of the things. When we get upstairs, Hashem is going to stand in front of Hashem and Yom Kippur. One of the three things that Hashem says to us is kabati itim b'torah. Did you make your time for Torah? Every day, that was as much as a person they say you can go a little bit loud, whatever a person feels they can do. But I've learned from experience because the more that a person can focus on their learning, it's less. This may work, but ultimately, in the long run, we make more. Right? We have this like credit card that everybody has when we go to Elam Haba, we swipe it when the doors open. So every mitzvah we do, every time we learn every word of Torah, we just put in more and more. Like what's the game of this world? The game is to collect as many points as possible. Right? That's the goal. And whoever collects the most points wins. That's it. So what's the point? You said every mitzvah you can do, you win. And when you get up, and you swipe the card. It's like the malachim will start singing, right? And it's right in there, Mama's Heichel Migdal. We always like to see the right time and compare that time of your learning and get out there and do your work. And so time was a storekeeper. His mom took time, and his wife said to him, she had a problem one time in the morning, and she tried to get in touch with him. And he said, "What do you mean?" He says, "In the morning." He says, "If I passed away and I was dead, would you try to contact me?" And she said, "No." So that time in the morning, from 9 to 11, I'm not part of the world. I don't exist. From 11 on, I'm in the store. That's not that's when I'm here. So you should find that time. Mace, it says Yamos B'Tof Oil, right? A person should mace, which means meet, but find a certain aspect of just closing off the world. A person should die, but the dying aspect means just close off everything. Like take your cell phone and put it on silent and just put it aside. And whatever comes in, don't mark me on it, but whatever comes in, I can tell you for sure I'm not going to lose from it, right? I'm just not going to lose from whatever that phone calls you may miss. You get it after, and it's important. If you left a message, you get it. But during that time of learning, focus and that lack of distraction is a nice idea. So I heard another beautiful story. I'll tell that story I heard, and then not necessarily so Nogea, but it was a story I heard. Very nice. There's a Rav in Beit Shemesh named Rav Kupshitz. He's a very special Jew, and he was in a taxi a few months ago, and the taxi started schmoozing back and forth, and they said something about Shabbat. When I go to Tel Aviv, so he said, "Will you work on Shabbat?" He said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, how come?" He said, "Because I have to make my parnasa. I have to. Okay, Rav said, everyone's got to make parnasa, and you're entitled." He said, "But I'm going to make a deal with you, right? If you're masking," he said, "I'm the Rav of this particular place in Beit Shemesh, and you can find me, and my word's good for it. I tell you what, 1 month, try just for 1 month. Don't work on Shabbat, and write down at the end of the month where you're missing, and if you're missing anything, I'll pay you. I'll give you a check on the spot. So I'll cover the entire amount of whatever you're missing if you want to try that." So the tax driver figures, why not? What's to lose? Rav's good for his word, and he happened to know the Rav. So he said, "I'll try it." So after a month, he came back to him and said, "What happened?" So the taxi driver said to him like this. He said, "Look, I didn't make any more money. I didn't make any more money." He said, "But this month in particular, I didn't have any flat tires. None of the kids had emergency dental issues, right? They run out there. I did it. My wife thought, like that, much control and we from that as published on Shabbat a person puts forth effort, and ultimately what comes from that is really outside of our hands. And saying whatever comes from that is what Hashem decides, and it should be the revach, it should be perfection, it should be straightness, and we should all just find out that place in our life that we can put that in, and no matter what you do in life, just if it's early, if it's late, whatever you're strong, put that in, and so you guys have any questions or any ideas?
How long did it take you to work up your business when you're able to just make yourself like a much longer time to learn every day?
So that's a good question. So when I was working on the European appliances, which are like the Israeli ones, they're a little bit smaller. The parts are much cheaper, and there's a lot of people out there doing it for less. The American appliances, the parts are a little bit more expensive because they come from America, and also there aren't a lot of people doing it necessarily that are specializing in that. So I was very fortunate. Actually, that was a huge Hashkafa story because I used to get up daven, and I'd wait by 8, and I'd go to my shiur for 15-minute shiur with a cornfeld, and then I would go out, and I would go first do Beit Shemesh jobs, then I would go to Beitar, because that's outside of Beit Shemesh. I'd go to Beitar and do Beitar jobs, then I'd go to Talpiot, right, buy all my parts, then I'd go back to Beitar, do the Beitar work, then go to Talpiot, then go to Beit Shemesh, finish those jobs, and it was like, by the time I got home, it was like 8 o'clock, and then I went to shul, I spent with the guy for 20 minutes, and that was out. So one day when I decided that, that's it, I want to sit in the morning, and I want to really just try to focus. So I used to have to go to Talpiot every day. And then there was a motor that I couldn't get. And so I called around to the other technicians, and I asked them, where I can get this motor. So one of the technicians said to me, well, have you tried this part store in Haifa? I'm like, no, I didn't know they exist. He's like, call them up and ask if they have it. So I called them, and this guy, Asher, answers. He's like, Shalom Aleichem. He's a real nice guy. Like, yeah, how are you? So I said, you have this certain motor? He's like, absolutely. Where do you live? I said, Beit Shemesh. He said, sure. And then when he gave me a price on it, the price of the motor was like 450 shekel cheaper than the Jerusalem one for the same motor. And I said, well, how am I going to get it? He said, well, we send by dollar. If you order over 400 shekel, we send for free. If it's under 400 shekel, it's like 25 shekel for the delivery. So I couldn't believe my ears. So I said, well, when's it going to get here? He's like, well, it's like next day delivery. So if I order it by 6, I get it next. So that 3 hours I was spending for 45 minutes Talpiot, and then in Talpiot, and then all the way back was like not 3 hours. So Hashem said, you sit and learn, and I'm going to send you the packages because that traveling time was just buying parts. And Hashem said, that literally within the week of deciding I'm going to try that, I didn't know it was going to happen. And I always said, I can't make it working full day, so why not learn half day and still not make it working half day? It's a great equation. Yeah. So whatever. Yeah. But everything all works out much stuff at the right time. So yeah, that was a big hashkafa.
A little bit similar to this question. You said at the beginning when you first started to work, you have to do like 8 to 8, right? A lot of times when people start working, they have to work. When they're just starting out, they don't have as much money. They have to work a lot more than, let's say, 10, 15 years down the road when they have more security and they can make their own hours. So,
Sure.
Could you describe a little bit that transition? And was that transition difficult of when you knew when you should start learning more, and how sometimes it can be hard to kind of tell yourself, okay, now I'm at that point, and now I can start to sit down and learn.
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of it has to do with finances. You have to. Every person has an obligation to finance his family and to make sure that there's food on the table and make sure that his wife is happy. Right? There's a famous story that of Ari Levine. Ari Levine, the great Ari Levine of Yerushalayim, right? The Rabbi Yerushalayim. He was on a very high level, and he literally had everything he had he gave away, and they had nothing in the house, like nothing. So one day he came home, and his wife had, and he also didn't borrow anything from anybody ever. So one day he came home and there was bread, and he said, "Where'd you get the bread from?" And she said, "Well, I borrowed from one of the neighbors." And he heard that she did that, and he said, "Okay." And he went outside and said, "Hashem is what I didn't realize that she's not holding on the level that I'm holding on, and I'm really, really sorry." And he walked about 200 meters from his house. He started kicking around the dirt a little bit, and there was a gold coin. Right? He picked it up and went and gave it to his wife. I mean, that's one side of the story. That's miracles. You know what I'm saying? We're not holding there. But a person can get to that point of realizing that I can still support my family. At the same time, I can add 5 minutes on it. I mean, 5 minutes is a tremendous amount to add on the learning. It's huge. And a person can even do 2 minutes. Whatever a person can do slowly, while being responsible enough to know that this is the amount of time for a shtadlut. Right? Shtadlut today, from one rabbi I speak to, he said a shtadlut for a person working a normal job today is an 8-hour day with lunch for an hour. That's like a normal hour. That's normal. So if a person can work less than that, it's great. If you have to work more, whatever you have to, you got to be responsible at the same time, trying to make sure those times for learning are just, written in steel.
What's the shadlus for looking for a job?
Well, that's a good question. So You mean to find out what you're supposed to do in life?
I'm saying, well, once you get a job, it's five. What? What's your status for actually looking for a job? Maybe, I guess I'm looking for a unit of time per day.
Good question. That may be a rough question.
It's not full.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that I asked one time a big tzaddik who passed away, named Rav Yaakov Weinberg, who was the revolutionary from. I asked Rav Yaakov, how do I find out what I'm supposed to do in life at all? So he said, here's what you do. He said, you make one list of all your talents and abilities, and write down with 100% honesty where you're holding all your talents and your abilities, and then write another list of your interests. What moves you, what you're interested in. He said, somewhere in the crisscross of those things, you're going to find out what Hashem wants you in this world. Everyone's created, right? Everyone's created as their. I always has this big, huge, massive wallet, and in that wallet, he's got every one of our pictures in it, and he says, "This is my Chaimke, this is my Malka, this is my Shlomo." And remember when I was kids, we used to get yearbook pictures. Remember, we always pass them out to each other. So Hashem's got yearbook pictures, all of them. So what's pshat? That he knows where each ones are coming from. He knows what our questions are. Each person has his own talents and abilities, and you've got something you can bring to the world that no one else can. Period. It's just impossible. There's no two people look alike and have the same abilities and kofod at all. And you have something extremely special. So you have to find what that is. And when you see what that interest is, that gives you sipuk, gives you excitement, and wants you to continue going on, then find whatever that is, and please God will come quickly. Yeah, you'll find the right thing. I had one friend who was looking forever. The guy he was learning, he was sitting studying, and he was a chemist. He was a very well-trained chemist, and he couldn't find a job. And for like 5 years, he was like this person that everyone was fucking stuck for, because he's a chemist. He's not a handyman, and he tried to work on a cold, didn't really work. He was studying at the same time as much as he could, and his family was in a very tough situation. And so all of a sudden, there's a company called Green Smoke. Remember Green Smoke? So it's a company that started in Beit Shemesh called Green Smoke with electronic cigarettes. He's a chemist, so they hired him. They started sending to China. Next thing you know, Marlboro bought Green Smoke 3 months ago for $120 million. There's these 3-star Beit Shemesh guys that just started out of nothing. So they bought him a house, and they gave him, he's got the biggest, he went from, but he was always focused, he was always consistent, he really believed that it's going to happen, and he had a tough time, and tried to find that right thing for him. So you got to hold on. It says also in the end of days, and we're living in it right now, that it says Hashem is going to send down in the very end of days this big, massive rope, right? And he's going to say, grab on. And we're all going to, I don't know if you guys in gym class had those big ropes, they're like, you had to climb them when we were kids. That's what I always envision as the ropes. So grab onto it for dear life, right? And as the times get a little bit closer to Mashiach, then Hashem gets a little shaky, right? We all kind of hold on to it, right? And it progresses, and time gets a little bit closer, and things start looking pretty, scary outside on the surface level. You see Hashem shaking a little harder, but he says, just hold on, because in the right time it's going to come, and Mashiach's going to come, and it's all we're going to see, Hashem's perfection, exactly why he did, right? Everything, to perfection. So when that rope is shaking, and the closer we get to Mashiach, each Sarah that Klal Yisrael goes through, it's going to shake harder and harder and harder. Just hold on. It's going to, wherever we go in life, just hold on. But as my appliance Rebbe once said, he said everyone runs around all day long with their head like chickens with their heads cut off, He said if you learn a little Torah in the morning before you go out, at least your head's on. We're all running around because that's our job, So it's the head of Adam Rishon that we have to say at the Pecha. You have to work from the scripture, right? You have to earn a pronouncement. It says right in the earliest thing in the Chumash. Get out there and work. So find what that is and put forth as much as you feel. But at the right time, the transition happens where you see that you're, after I did Beitar for about 3 years, Beit Shemesh became clear that there was a person in Beit Shemesh who had all of Beit Shemesh, and his wife wasn't happy. And about 12 years ago, he just went back to America and went into insurance, and so that whole appliance network of his job position, kind of gave me at that point. It was enough that Beit Shemesh didn't have to go to Beitar anymore, and then the shkacha happened with the cards, and now I was able to kind of balance both, a fragile balance to hold both and make everyone happy. Yeah. Be well. Nice to meet everybody. Great week.